Hey, Joey Bryant with Nashville Steam here with volunteer coordinator Stephen Hook. We're down here at the steam shop, and we talk a lot about how 576 is more than halfway done with mechanical restoration. That doesn't just mean work on the wheels and the boiler, but also all the appliances that have been fully repaired and are ready to go. Stephen, talk us through what we see here today.
We have a long array of appliances that have already been restored, and we're excited to install them back onto the locomotive. Starting here at the front, we have our hot water pump. This is part of our Worthington SA feed water system. This system is comprised of a hot water pump, a feed water heater, and a cold water pump, and all the linkage and piping that goes in between them that automatically puts water into the boiler, all at the control of one valve. So the fireman, he doesn't have to lift so much as a finger to turn the valve open, and it automatically feeds preheated water into the boiler. This is remarkably more efficient than an injector, because it can be dialed back. The fireman can actually control the quantity of water that goes into the boiler. This is a reciprocating pump. It actually drags water out of a reservoir that is called the feed water heater, which is over here behind us. And as that pump is going back and forth, it actually compounds the energy from the boiler pressure and uses hydraulic leverage to overcome the boiler pressure and push water into the boiler. This hot water pump is only as good as the water that is given to it. And our feed water heater is what feeds our hot water pump. Now, this feed water heater is actually a large, kind of similar to a toilet bowl. It actually has a float inside of it and a reservoir. And that reservoir is mixed with exhaust steam as the locomotive is working. So locomotive works, exhaust steam comes up and out the stack, but it also comes up a separate pipe that goes into your feed water heater. It is then mixed in with the feed water, and that preheats your water, so it's less of a shock on the boiler, and we're using some of that energy before it goes out of the stack. That just makes this locomotive remarkably more efficient. The third component in our feed water system is our cold water pump. The cold water pump is a centrifugal type pump. There's a vane that is rotated really quickly, and water is sucked in, and then that spinning sends the water to the outside, and it comes up and out the outlet. And that is sent on up into our feed water heater. So the feed water heater, float comes down, calls for water, and that will spool up our cold water pump.
All three major components of the water pumping system are ready to go.
Yes, sir. Every single one of them has been gone through, completely restored, and it is ready to go back on the locomotive.
That's incredible.
Like most of the components on this locomotive, they were just full of rust and sediment debris from years of sitting in the park, and also the last few years of the locomotive's operation.
Okay, now we've learned a lot about the water pump system, but what are these two devices right here?
Well, these two devices right here are Nathan mechanical lubricators. Both of them are responsible for taking oil and pumping it to the necessary places throughout the locomotive that need lubrication. These two lubricators are driven by the actual running gear on the locomotive, so as the rods are going back and forth, they constantly crank these pumps around, and they pump out essential lubrication to the components that need them most. Of course, a steam locomotive has a lot of moving parts, so there's a lot of lines that come off of these. This lubricator right here specifically is for the valve oil. The valve oil being the steam valve, the steam piston, all of those components that are interacted with steam specifically. It takes a very heavy kind of oil. And then the other lubricator was dedicated to running gear. So your eccentric link, lifting blocks, all of your crossheads, valve crossheads and guides, trailing truck, engine truck, anything that took a constant amount of exterior lubrication for the actual exterior moving components of the locomotive will run off of this lubricator right here.
All right, now Stephen, we talked about the water pump system, and this looks really heavy and important, so what is this?
It is very heavy and also very important. All modern steam locomotives are required to have two means of putting water in the boiler. We already discussed one. This is our other. This is our Nathan non-lifting injector. The difference between a non-lifting injector and a lifting injector is this injector sits beneath the water line, the lowest point in the tender. So it does not have to lift water up to it in order to inject water into the boiler. But that's what it does. It uses a steam jet from the boiler, and it shoots it through a cone, and it sucks water up with it, and the velocity of the water and steam combined pushes water from the tank into the boiler. So this is our secondary means of filling the boiler, more commonly used when we're stopped in a station, whereas we would use the feed water system when the engine's actually running. It was completely disassembled, inspected, and all of the parts that would normally wear were renewed. All the sealing surfaces were lapped to make sure that they had a good tight seal. All the hoses and lines were cleaned out, made sure that they were free of obstruction. Our starting valve was gone through, all the seats were checked, lapped in if they needed it. All in all, just to make sure that this thing will operate 100% as intended when we install it on the boiler for years to come.
All right, now what we have here is by far one of the most recognizable pieces of the locomotive. That's 576's headlight. You know, the headlight doesn't really do a whole lot without the turbo generator. Stephen, tell us more about that.
Well, the turbo generator is exactly as it sounds. It is a turbo generator. What it does is it has a turbine, a steam turbine, that uses steam off of the boiler to spin a generator. And that essentially just generates electricity to run headlights, radios. Well, back in the day, it wouldn't have run radios, but modern day, it'll run radio, headlights, any cab electronics that we may need.
Stephen, we've seen what's been wrapped up in the shop. What's going on out here in the engine?
Well, we're currently working on putting the backhead braces in. The braces essentially keep the large section above the crown sheet from blowing out under the pressure of the boiler. And of course, we're reinstalling them to meet our safety factor of 4 on the boiler. At the same time, we're also working on renewing the frame, making sure that our shoes and wedges that hold the driving boxes center are tight and fit well so that we won't have to redo any of this work anytime soon. All parts of preparing to have our wheels back put up under the locomotive.